They said he aged out of the system and inherited a worthless salt cave. What he found inside would change not just his life, but the meaning of legacy itself. And if you've ever felt like you were left with nothing, or that the world had already counted you out, then maybe this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button, because we're building a community here for people who know what it's like to find light in the darkest places. The day I turned 18, the world gave me a cardboard box and a bus ticket. The box held everything I owned: 3 changes of clothes, a worn copy of a book I'd read 100 times, a toothbrush, and a stack of papers that proved I existed, at least to the state. The bus ticket was one way, to a city I'd never seen, to a halfway house that smelled of disinfectant and quiet desperation. For 2 years, I'd been counting down the days to this moment, thinking it was freedom. Standing on the curb outside the iron gates of the St. Jude's Home for Boys, watching the bus hiss to a stop, I realized it wasn't freedom. It was just a different kind of cage, one without visible bars. The air tasted thin and cold, the way it always does in late October when the trees have given up and the sky is the color of old tin. A part of me wanted to turn back, to knock on the door I had just been pushed through. But there was no one on the other side who would answer. That's the first rule you learn in the system. Don't look back. There's nothing there for you. My caseworker, Mr. Davies, had handed me the final envelope that morning. His office was always too warm, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and regret. He had a tired face, the kind you get from seeing too many stories end the same way. "Leo," he'd said, not looking up from the form he was signing, "this is it. You're an adult now." He slid a thick manila envelope across the desk. It had my name on it, written in a shaky, unfamiliar hand. "This came for you, from a solicitor, something about an inheritance." I remember the hollow laugh that escaped my lips. Inheritance. What a joke. Kids like me don't have inheritances. We have records. We have files. We have scars. We don't have family heirlooms or trust funds. "Probably a mistake," I said. He shrugged, a gesture that contained the weight of 1,000 similar conversations. "Maybe, but it's legally yours, whatever it is." He finally looked at me then, and for a second I saw something other than bureaucratic fatigue in his eyes. It might have been pity, or maybe just a flicker of simple, human sadness. "Good luck, Leo," he said, and the dismissal was gentle but absolute. The conversation was over. My childhood was over. On the bus, I didn't open the envelope. It sat on my lap like a tombstone, heavy and cold. I watched the manicured lawns of the suburbs bleed into the cracked pavement of the city. The other passengers were ghosts, their faces blurred by the grimy window, each one lost in their own private weather. I was just another ghost, floating toward a future that felt as gray and empty as the sky. The halfway house was exactly what I expected. A tall, narrow building squeezed between a laundromat and a pawn shop. My room was on the 3rd floor, a space no bigger than a closet, with a cot, a metal locker, and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. The air was heavy with the ghosts of all the other boys who had passed through, their hopes and fears soaked into the plaster. For the first week, I did nothing. I followed the rules. I ate the bland food. I sat in my room and stared at the brick wall. The envelope sat in my locker, unopened. It was a door I was afraid to walk through. What could possibly be on the other side but more disappointment? More proof that I was utterly and completely alone. it was easier not to know. It was safer to expect nothing. That's the other rule you learn in the system. Hope is a dangerous thing. It's a razor blade you swallow. Finally, after a week of listening to the city cry itself to sleep every night, I couldn't stand it anymore. The not knowing was worse than any possible bad news. My hands were shaking as I pulled the envelope from the locker. The paper was thick, expensive feeling. It felt like it belonged to someone else's life. Inside was a letter from a law firm, Albright and Finch, and a thick sheaf of legal documents filled with words I didn't understand. The letter, however, was simple enough. It was from a woman named Sarah Albright. She said she was the executor of my grandfather's estate. My grandfather. The words felt foreign on my tongue. I had a grandfather? No one at St. Jude's had ever mentioned a grandfather. My file said, parents deceased, no known relatives. It had been the first line in the story of my life, the period at the end of a sentence I never got to read. According to the letter, my grandfather, Thomas Miller, had passed away 6 months ago. He had left me everything he owned. My heart did a stupid, hopeful little flip. Everything he owned. Maybe it was a small house, a little money in the bank, something to start with, something to build on. But then I kept reading. The inheritance consisted of a single parcel of land, 40 acres in a place called Havenwood. The property included a small, dilapidated farmhouse and, the letter specified, an inactive and commercially worthless salt deposit, colloquially known as the Salt Caves. The final paragraph was the real punch to the gut. The property carried a significant amount of back taxes, a debt now legally mine. If the debt wasn't settled within 90 days, the county would seize the land and auction it off. The deadline was 5 weeks away. So, that was it. My inheritance wasn't a gift, it was a bill. A joke with a cruel punchline. I wasn't being given a home. I was being given a final eviction notice from a life I never even knew I had. I laughed, a dry, bitter sound that echoed in the tiny room. Of course. This made sense. This was the world I knew, a world that gives you nothing but the debt of the people who left you behind. I scheduled a meeting with Sarah Albright. Her office was in a sleek glass tower downtown, a world away from the grit and grime of my new neighborhood. The lobby was all marble and hushed whispers. I felt like a stray dog that had wandered into a palace, my worn-out jeans and thin jacket a glaring stain on the polished perfection. Ms. Albright was older, with sharp, intelligent eyes that didn't seem to miss anything. She wore a perfectly tailored suit, and her office overlooked the entire city, a sprawling map of lights and shadows. She wasn't unkind, but she was pragmatic, her voice crisp and professional. She laid out the situation with the detached precision of a surgeon. "Leo," she began, gesturing to the chair opposite her desk, "I was your grandfather's lawyer for 20 years. He was a complicated man, very private." She slid a file across the polished wood. It was thick with documents, photographs, and maps. "This is everything. The deed, the tax assessments, the notices of delinquency. It's all there." I just stared at the file. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why would he leave me a debt? Why leave me anything at all if he never wanted me?" Ms. Albright's expression softened for a moment. "I don't believe he ever stopped wanting you, Leo. His circumstances were difficult. After your parents passed, he wasn't well. Financially, emotionally. He felt the state could provide for you better than he could. He thought it was a kindness to spare you his struggle. A kindness to grow up a number in a file, a bed in a dormitory, a ghost in the system." I felt a hot surge of anger, so sharp and sudden it made my vision swim. A kindness? I repeated, my voice shaking. He threw me away. She didn't argue. She just nodded slowly. From where you're standing, I imagine it feels that way. I'm just telling you what he told me. She leaned forward, folding her hands on the desk. Now, about the property. The assessment is low. The land is rocky, poor for farming. The house is, to be blunt, likely a teardown. And the salt cave, it's a geological anomaly, but the salt is too impure for commercial extraction. Several companies have looked at it over the years. They all passed. That's why the taxes are so high. They're based on an old mineral rights assessment that never paid off. So it's worthless, I said flatly. Financially, yes, she conceded. The debt is approximately $5,000. The county is not flexible. They've already had an offer from a commercial aggregates company, a preliminary bid for when it goes to auction. They want to quarry the rock. They don't care about the cave. $5,000. It might as well have been $5 million. I had $87 to my name, the final payout from my work-study job at the home. So I do nothing, I said, the emptiness returning, cold and familiar. I just let them take it. That is your simplest option, she agreed, her voice neutral. You sign these papers, relinquish your claim, and the debt is no longer your concern. You walk away, free and clear. Free and clear. The words mocked me. I would be walking away from the only thing anyone had ever left me, the only proof that I was connected to something, to someone. Even if it was just a pile of rocks and a bill. What's the other option? I asked, though I already knew it was impossible. You pay the taxes, she said simply, and the property is yours. The deed is in your name. No mortgage, no liens other than the tax debt. She paused, her gaze steady. Your grandfather was very specific in his will. He said you had to see it. He said it was important that you stand on the land yourself before you made any decision. That was it. That was the hook. A dying man's last wish. It was a command from a ghost, a plea from a man I'd never met. To go and stand on a piece of worthless land and see what? A collapsing house? A hole in the ground? It was absurd. It was pointless. And yet, I knew I was going to do it. Because what else did I have? I had a tiny room with a view of a brick wall. I had $87. I had a future that looked like a long, gray, empty road. Maybe, just maybe, this worthless piece of land was a detour. Maybe it was just a different kind of dead end, but at least it was a dead end of my own choosing. How do I get there? I asked. Ms. Albright smiled, a small, sad, knowing smile. She turned to a map on her wall and tapped a finger on a tiny, insignificant dot in the middle of a vast expanse of green and brown. There's a bus, she said. It runs twice a week. The bus ride to Havenwood was like traveling back in time. The city's steel and glass towers gave way to strip malls, then to suburbs with identical houses, then to rolling farmland that eventually withered into scrub and rock. The pavement turned to gravel. The other passengers got off one by one, leaving me alone with the drone of the engine and the rattle of the windows. The driver, a man with a face like a road map of every back road in the state, glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Havenwood, son," he grunted, pulling over at a crossroads marked only by a leaning stop sign and a rusty mailbox. "End of the line." I stepped off the bus and into a wall of silence. The air was different here. It smelled of pine and damp earth and something else, something ancient and mineral. The sky was huge, a vast, empty blue canvas. There was no town in sight, just a dirt road that disappeared into a line of skeletal trees. Ms. Albright had given me a hand-drawn map. My grandfather's land was another 3 miles down that road. 3 miles. My duffel bag felt heavy, but I shifted it on my shoulder and started walking. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of sounds I wasn't used to. The crunch of my boots on the gravel, the whisper of the wind through the tall, dry grass, the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. It was a lonely sound, but it wasn't the same crushing loneliness of the city. This was a clean loneliness, a wild loneliness. It felt real. After an hour of walking, I saw it, a collapsing roofline, barely visible over a rise. The house was worse than I had imagined. It wasn't just dilapidated, it was a skeleton. The paint had long since peeled away, leaving the wood a silvery, splintered gray. The windows were boarded up or broken, dark, vacant eyes staring out at nothing. The porch sagged so badly it was nearly touching the ground. The yard was a jungle of weeds and thorny bushes, reclaiming everything with a slow, relentless patience. This wasn't a home. It was a grave. I walked around the perimeter, my heart sinking with every step. This was a mistake, a fool's errand. There was nothing here for me but ghosts and decay. I was about to turn around, to walk the 3 miles back to the crossroads and wait for the next bus out of this forgotten place, whenever that might be. But then I remembered my grandfather's words, relayed through his lawyer. You have to see it. You have to stand on the land. I pushed my way through the overgrown yard toward the back of the property, where the land sloped down into a small, rocky ravine. And that's when I saw it. The entrance to the cave. It wasn't a gaping hole, just a dark slash in the side of the hill, partially hidden by a curtain of tangled vines. A cool, damp air breathed out of it, carrying that strange mineral scent, stronger now. It smelled of deep, old places, of things that had been waiting for a very long time. Curiosity is a powerful thing. It can be stronger than fear, stronger than reason. I had to know what was inside. I used my phone as a flashlight, its thin beam cutting a nervous path into the darkness. The entrance was narrow, forcing me to turn sideways to squeeze through. Inside, the space opened up immediately. I was in a vast cavern, far bigger than I expected. The beam of my phone barely reached the ceiling, which glittered with what I assumed were salt crystals. The air was still and cold, and the silence was absolute. My own breathing sounded like a storm. The floor was uneven, a mix of packed earth and smooth, worn rock. It felt like I was standing inside the belly of some great sleeping beast. I walked deeper, my light dancing across the walls. They weren't smooth. They were covered in strange crystalline formations, like frozen waterfalls of salt. In some places, the salt was milky white. In others, it was tinged with pinks and grays from other mineral deposits. It was beautiful, in a stark, alien way, but it was also just a cave, an empty hole in the ground. I felt a fresh wave of disappointment wash over me. What did I expect? A hidden treasure? A chest of gold? I was a fool, chasing the last words of a man who had abandoned me. I was about to leave when my light caught something out of place. A flat, level surface against the far wall. It wasn't natural rock. It was wood. A workbench. Old and dusty, but clearly man-made. On it sat a few rusted tools, a lantern, and a small metal lockbox. It was about the size of a shoebox, dark with age and rust. It had a heavy-duty padlock on it. My heart started hammering against my ribs. This was it. This was something. This was a message. I ran my fingers over the cold metal. The box was heavy, solid. I shook it, but nothing rattled. Whatever was inside was packed tight. There was no key. I looked around the workbench, under it, all around the immediate area. Nothing. Of course, it wouldn't be that easy. I spent the next hour searching for a way to open it. I tried to pry the lock with an old screwdriver from the bench, but the metal was too thick. I tried to smash it with a rock, but I only succeeded in denting the corner and bruising my hand. It was hopeless. Defeated, I sat down on the cold ground, the box in my lap. The beam from my phone was starting to flicker, the battery dying. Soon I'd be in complete darkness. I felt a familiar despair creeping in, the cold, heavy blanket I'd lived under for so long. This was just another locked door in a life full of them. I leaned my head back against the salty wall and closed my eyes. And then I heard it. Not a sound, but a memory. One of the very few I had from before St. Jude's. A vague, hazy image of a man's hands, large and calloused, showing me how to tie a special kind of knot. A voice, deep and gentle, saying, "Everything has a key, Leo. You just have to find the right one. Sometimes it's not what you think it is." My eyes snapped open. The key isn't what you think it is. I looked at the box, then at the workbench. My gaze fell on the old lantern. It was a hurricane lamp, the kind with a glass chimney and a metal base where the fuel would go. It was empty, dusty. But there was something about the base. It had a small, screw-off cap. My hands trembled as I picked it up and twisted the cap. It came off with a rusty squeal. I tilted the lantern, and something small and dark fell into my palm. A key. Small, intricate, and made of old, tarnished brass. It fit the padlock perfectly. With a loud click, the lock sprang open. I lifted the heavy lid of the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like dried leaves, was a stack of letters tied with a faded piece of twine. On top of the stack was a single sealed envelope with my name, Leo, written on it in that same shaky, familiar script from the solicitor's envelope. My grandfather's handwriting. This was it, the real inheritance. My phone battery died just as I pulled out the first letter, plunging me into absolute blackness. The kind of darkness that feels solid, that presses in on you from all sides. For a moment, panic seized me. I was alone, miles from anywhere, in a cave with no light. But the weight of the letters in my hand was an anchor. I remembered the lantern. I fumbled for it on the workbench, my fingers tracing its familiar shape. I found a small box of matches tucked next to it. I struck one, the flare of light a violent, beautiful explosion in the dark. The wick in the lantern was old but intact. It took a few tries, but it caught, and a warm, golden light filled the cavern, pushing the shadows back. The light was soft, alive. It made the salt crystals on the walls glitter like a million tiny stars. In the warm glow of the lantern, the cave didn't feel menacing anymore. It felt sacred, like a church. I sat back down, my back against the wall, and carefully untied the twine around the letters. I opened the one addressed to me. The paper was thin and dry, the ink faded in places. The letter was dated just a few weeks before he died. "My dearest Leo," it began. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and it means you have found your way back home. I am sorry. Those are the first and most important words I have for you. I am sorry for the silence. I am sorry for the years you spent alone. I know you must hate me. You have every right to. I want you to know it was never because I didn't love you. I loved you more than the sky and the soil and the sun. I loved you so much that I let you go." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I had to stop and wipe them away with the back of my hand. I had spent my entire life believing I was an unwanted thing, a piece of baggage left on a doorstep. To read these words, to feel the love pouring out of them, was like feeling the sun on my face after a lifetime in a dungeon. It hurt. It was a beautiful, terrible pain. Your parents, my beautiful daughter and her husband, they were like me. They loved the earth. They were botanists. They traveled the world collecting rare and endangered seeds, trying to preserve the things our world is so carelessly throwing away. They died in a landslide during a research trip. You were only 2. I tried, Leo. I swear to God I tried to raise you, but my heart was broken. The farm was failing. I was drinking too much. I looked at your little face and all I could see was their ghosts. I was drowning, and I was pulling you down with me. Giving you to the state was the hardest thing I have ever done. I told myself it was for your own good, that they could give you a stability I couldn't. A warm bed, 3 meals a day, a chance. I told myself it was a sacrifice, not an abandonment. I don't know if I believe that anymore. Maybe it was just cowardice. Maybe I was just a broken old man who ran away. I have lived with that choice every single day of my life. I had to put the letter down. My whole body was shaking. The story I had told myself about my life, the one where I was a mistake, an afterthought, was crumbling. It was being replaced by a story of love and grief and a terrible, impossible choice. I wasn't abandoned. I was protected, sacrificed for. It was too much to take in. I felt a rage I didn't know I was capable of, a deep, primal scream of a thing. It was a rage at him for being too weak, a rage at the world for being so cruel, a rage at myself for believing I was worthless for so long. I cried then, not the silent, choked-back tears of an orphan in his bunk, but loud, ragged sobs that echoed off the salt walls of the cave. I cried for the little boy who thought he was unlovable. I cried for the parents I never knew. I cried for the broken old man who had spent a lifetime in this cave, writing letters to a grandson he was too afraid to meet. It was a storm of grief I had been holding back for 18 years. When the storm passed, I was empty, hollowed out. The lantern flame flickered, casting my dancing shadow on the wall. I picked up the letter again. My hands were steady now. I had to finish it. I had to know the rest. I have spent the last 20 years trying to build something for you, something to make up for what I took away. This land, this cave, it is not what it seems. The world thinks it's worthless. The taxman thinks it's a liability. They are wrong. This salt cave is special. The constant temperature, the low humidity, the natural salinity of the air. It creates a perfect environment for preservation. It is a vault, a sanctuary. I have continued your parents' work, Leo, here, in the dark. My eyes scanned the cavern, seeing it now not as an empty space, but as a container, a vault. What was he preserving? There is a false wall at the back of this main cavern, behind the largest vein of pink salt. Push on the third stone from the left, a foot from the floor. It will open. What you find there is your birthright. It is your legacy, and it is your choice. The world will want to take it, to sell it, to pave it over. The tax debt is real. That aggregates company is circling like a vulture. They don't know what's really here. They just want the rock. You can sell. You can take the money they'll offer and run. I wouldn't blame you. You deserve an easy life after the one you've had. Or you can fight. You can stay. You can become the guardian of this place, the way I have tried to be. The choice is yours, and I will love you no matter what you decide. All I ask is that you see it first. See what your parents and I gave our lives to protect. Then you can decide who you want to be. Your loving grandfather, Thomas. A false wall, a secret, a choice. I stood up, my legs feeling weak but steady. I took the lantern and walked toward the back of the cavern, to the place he described. A massive wall of rock and salt, with a thick, beautiful vein of pinkish, rose-colored salt running through it like a river. I counted the stones, my fingers tracing the cool, gritty surface. Third from the left, a foot from the floor. It looked no different from any other stone. I put my hand on it and pushed. Nothing. I pushed harder, putting my whole weight into it. Still nothing. Doubt crept in. Was this another one of his tricks? A final, cruel joke? But then I remembered his voice from my fragment of a memory. Sometimes the key is not what you think it is. I didn't just push. I pressed in and then slid it to the side. There was a low grinding sound, the sound of rock on rock. A section of the wall, a piece so perfectly fitted I hadn't even seen the seams, receded into the darkness, revealing a narrow passageway. A new wave of cold, dry air washed over me, smelling of earth and seeds and time itself. My grandfather had built a tomb, and he had built an ark. My hand was shaking so much I could barely hold the lantern steady. I took a deep breath and stepped through the opening, out of the life I had known, and into the one that had been waiting for me all along. The passage was short, only about 10 feet long, and it opened into another chamber, this one smaller and more deliberately shaped than the main cavern. It was rectangular, the walls and floor smoothed by hand, and it was filled with shelves, hundreds of them, reaching from the floor to the high ceiling. And on the shelves were thousands upon thousands of small, labeled containers. Glass jars, wooden boxes, clay pots, and sealed foil packets. Each one was meticulously labeled in my grandfather's spidery handwriting. Solanum lycopersicum, black crim. Zea maize, glass gem corn. Phaseolus vulgaris, Cherokee Trail of Tears. Seeds. It was a seed vault, a library of life. I walked down the aisles, holding the lantern high. The sheer scale of it was breathtaking. There were seeds for vegetables, fruits, grains, flowers, and trees I had never even heard of. Heirlooms from every corner of the globe. Seeds that were likely extinct in the outside world, wiped out by industrial agriculture and climate change. In the center of the room was another workbench, this one clean and organized. On it lay a set of thick, leather-bound journals. I opened the top one. It was a logbook detailing every seed in the collection, where it came from, its history, its growing needs, its genetic makeup. It was a lifetime of work. More than a lifetime. It was the work of 3 people, my mother, my father, and my grandfather. This was their legacy. This was my legacy. It wasn't money or property in the traditional sense. It was a treasure of incalculable value. It was a repository of biodiversity, a promise for the future, a shield against the world's carelessness. I sat there for hours reading the journals. My grandfather's entries were filled with scientific observation, but also with poetry and love. He wrote about the resilience of a particular strain of wheat, the vibrant color of a forgotten tomato variety. And he wrote about me. "I packed the Appalachian blue corn today," one entry read. "Your mother loved this one. She said it was the color of the sky just before a storm. I hope you get to see a sky like that one day, Leo. A real sky, not one boxed in by buildings. Another one said, "The world is getting warmer. The rains are less reliable." These seeds aren't just a collection anymore. They're a lifeboat. Maybe one day you'll be the captain. I finally understood. The worthless salt cave wasn't worthless. It was the most valuable thing in the world. And the debt, the threat of the auction, wasn't a punishment. It was a test, a crucible. He had left me a choice, not a burden. He had given me a purpose, hidden inside a problem. I could take the easy way out, or I could become the person he hoped I would be, the captain of the lifeboat. I closed the journal and stood up. The decision was already made. There was no choice, not really. How could I walk away from this? This was the first real thing I had ever had. It was more than a home. It was a mission. I was not going to let some quarry company turn my family's legacy into a pile of gravel. I was going to fight. The first step was survival. I had almost no money and nowhere to live but a collapsing farmhouse. I spent the next 2 days salvaging what I could. The house was a wreck, but one room in the back had a solid roof and 4 intact walls. The old iron wood stove was rusted but functional. There was a hand pump well in the yard that, after a lot of priming and muscle, produced clear, cold water. I used the $87 to buy some basic supplies from a general store in a town 10 miles away. Kerosene for the lantern, canned food, matches, a heavy blanket. The woman behind the counter, a lady named Martha, with kind, tired eyes, looked at my meager purchases. "You stayin' out at the old Miller place?" she asked, her voice gentle. I nodded. "That's my grandfather's land." A flicker of recognition and sadness crossed her face. "Thomas, he was a good man, kept to himself, but he was good. I'm sorry for your loss." It was the first time anyone had offered me condolences. It felt strange, real. "Thank you," I said. "Heard the county's looking to auction it off," she added, bagging my things. "Tax trouble. Shame. That aggregates company has been sniffing around for years." "I'm not letting them have it," I said, and the words felt solid in my own mouth. I sounded more confident than I felt. She gave me a long, appraising look, then a small smile. "Good for you," she said. "Your grandfather would be proud." Back at the farm, I moved into the one livable room. It was cold and bare, but it was mine. I spent my days exploring the land, reading my grandfather's journals, and trying to formulate a plan. The journals were my Bible. They contained not just information about the seeds, but detailed notes on the geology of the cave and the surrounding land. My grandfather, it turned out, was a self-taught genius. He'd mapped the entire cave system. He'd documented the unique ecosystem that the salt deposit supported. He'd even written letters to universities and conservation groups years ago, trying to get them to recognize the area's significance. But he was always dismissed as an eccentric old hermit. The key, I realized, was not to argue about the tax debt. I could never win that fight. The key was to prove that the land was worth more to the world as a preserve than it was as a quarry. I found the file for the aggregates company. The official proposal was to blast and level the entire ravine to get at a specific type of limestone that lay beneath the salt. They would destroy the cave. They would destroy everything. The auction was in 3 weeks. I didn't have much time. I used the last of my phone credit to make a call to Ms. Albright. I explained what I had found. I expected her to be skeptical, to tell me it was a lovely story, but legally irrelevant. But she was silent for a long time after I finished. "A seed vault," she said finally, her professional composure gone. her voice full of something that sounded like awe. "He never told me." The old fox. He never told me the whole story. "Can we stop them?" I asked, my voice desperate. "It's an uphill battle, Leo," she said, her pragmatic tone returning, but with a new edge to it. "A tax auction is a powerful legal instrument, but this changes things. This isn't just about a derelict property anymore. This is about heritage, conservation. Send me everything you have, scans of the journals, photos of the seeds, your grandfather's letters to those universities. I'll see what I can do. I know some people in environmental law. No promises, but I'll make some calls." For the next 2 weeks, I lived and breathed my grandfather's work. I used a small solar-powered charger I found in his workshop to get my phone working again, and spent hours taking pictures of the journals and the seed collection, sending them to Ms. Albright. I felt like a scholar, a detective, and a soldier all at once. I was defending my home. One afternoon, a shiny black truck I didn't recognize pulled up the dirt road. A man in a suit and hard hat got out. He had a clipboard and a predatory smile. "You the new owner?" he asked, looking around at the property with undisguised contempt. "I'm Leo Miller," I said, standing my ground on the sagging porch. "This is my family's land." "Right," he said with a little smirk. "Not for long, from what I hear. I'm from Consolidated Aggregates, just doing a pre-auction survey. Don't mind me." He started walking the property line, making notes. "You'd be smart to just walk away, kid," he called over his shoulder. "We'll be putting in a bid the county can't refuse. You're just delaying the inevitable." I watched him, my hands clenched into fists. He represented everything my grandfather had fought against. The carelessness, the greed, the blindness of a world that only sees value in things it can grind into dust. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, letting him see that I wasn't going anywhere. He eventually got back in his truck and sped off, leaving a cloud of dust behind. The encounter left me shaken, but also more determined than ever. This was real now. The monster had a face. The night before the auction, the phone rang. It was Ms. Albright. "Leo," she said, and her voice was tight with excitement. "I think we have something." She explained that one of the people she'd contacted was a professor at the State Agricultural University, a Dr. Aris Thorne, who specialized in heirloom botany. He had been stunned by the photos I'd sent. One of the seed varieties in the collection, a type of drought-resistant maize, was thought to have been extinct for over a century. It was a legendary ghost crop that botanists had been searching for decades. "He's driving up there himself," she said. "He's leaving now. He wants to see the collection and verify it. If it's real, he says it's one of the most significant botanical discoveries of the century." "But the auction is tomorrow morning," I said, my heart sinking. "He won't get here in time." "He might not have to," she replied. "He's already been on the phone with the university's legal department, the state's Historical Preservation Society, and a national news outlet. He's calling it the Miller Seed Vault. He's making a lot of noise, Leo. A state auction is a public proceeding. Selling off a site of major scientific and historical importance for a gravel pit. It's not a good look." A spark of hope, fierce and bright, ignited in my chest. It wasn't a guarantee, it was a chance, a fighting chance. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the cave, the lantern casting a warm glow on the shelves of seeds. I felt the presence of my parents and my grandfather with me. I was not just a boy in a cave. I was a guardian, a link in a chain. I was standing watch. At dawn, I walked out to the road to wait. The air was crisp and cold. The sky was turning from gray to a soft, hopeful pink. Around 9 o'clock, 2 cars arrived. The first was the county official for the auction, a grim-faced man who looked annoyed to be there. The second was the man from Consolidated Aggregates. He got out of his truck and gave me a triumphant sneer. "Here for the show, kid? Should be a short one." Just as the county official was about to start the proceedings, a third car came barreling down the road, an old, dusty station wagon that looked like it had been driven through a war zone. A man with a wild mane of white hair and dirt under his fingernails jumped out. He looked like a mad scientist, and he was beaming. "Am I too late?" he yelled, striding toward us. "Dr. Aris Thorne, State University. I'm here to inspect the Miller's Seed Vault on behalf of the state's Agricultural Heritage Program." The county official looked bewildered. The man from the aggregates company looked furious. "The what?" he snapped. "There's no vault here. It's a worthless salt cave." "That's where you're wrong, sir," Dr. Thorne said, his eyes twinkling. He looked at me. "Leo Miller, it is an honor to meet you. Would you do me the great honor of showing me your family's work?" I led him to the cave. As I opened the secret passage and he stepped into the vault, he stopped breathing. He just stood there, his mouth open, slowly turning in a circle. Tears welled in his eyes. "My God," he whispered, "it's all real. It's a treasure, a living treasure." We spent the rest of the day in the vault. Dr. Thorne was like a kid in a candy store, gently handling the jars, reading the labels, his excitement growing with every shelf. The county official and the aggregates man had no choice but to wait. Ms. Albright called me mid-afternoon. The university, backed by the Preservation Society, had filed an emergency injunction. The story had hit the regional newswire. The auction was suspended, pending a full evaluation of the site's scientific and historical value. We had won. At least, we had won the first battle. The war wasn't over, but the tide had turned. The man from the aggregates company left without another word, his face a mask of thunder. The county official packed up his briefcase and informed me that all proceedings were on hold indefinitely. When they were gone, Dr. Thorne put a hand on my shoulder. "Your grandfather was a visionary," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "What he and your parents built here, it's world-changing. This place needs to be protected, and you, young man, are at the center of it." In the months that followed, everything changed. The Miller's Seed Vault became a real place. The university partnered with me, establishing a foundation to protect and study the collection. They paid off the back taxes as a finder's fee and donation to the preservation effort. They helped me secure grants to repair the farmhouse and install solar power. They hired me as the official curator of the collection. My title was a fancy way of saying I was its guardian, just as my grandfather had hoped. I wasn't just an orphan anymore. I was a scientist, a conservationist, a storyteller. I spent my days working with Dr. Thorne and his students, cataloging the seeds and learning the science behind my family's work. I learned to farm, using my grandfather's journals to grow test plots of the heirloom vegetables in the rocky soil outside the farmhouse. I was bringing the seeds back to life. I was finishing their story. I never became rich. The foundation owns the land now, ensuring it can never be sold or developed. I draw a modest salary as the curator. But I have something so much more valuable than money. I have a home. I have a purpose. I have a connection to the family I never knew. Sometimes, late at night, I go into the vault and just sit in the silence, surrounded by the quiet, powerful promise of all those sleeping seeds. I read my grandfather's letters. There were dozens of them, one for every year he was without me. They told the story of his life, his grief, his work, and his unending love for me. He had left me a map, not just to a hidden room, but to a hidden part of myself. He taught me that an inheritance isn't about what you're given, it's about what you choose to do with it. He gave me a worthless salt cave, and in it I found the entire world. And this is what I want to leave you with. If you've made it this far in the story, thank you. It means a lot to me to be able to share it. Maybe you've been in a place like I was, feeling like you were left with nothing but a debt, a burden, or an empty room. Maybe the world told you that what you had, or who you were, was worthless. I want you to look closer. The most valuable things are often hidden inside the things the world has thrown away. The key is often not what you think it is. What is the worthless salt cave in your life? What legacy are you building in the dark, waiting for the right person to find it? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. Your stories matter. They are a part of this community we're building. And if this story meant something to you, please consider subscribing. We're all just trying to find our way home. And sometimes, the best way to do that is to listen to each other's stories. Thank you for listening to mine.